The Christmas lights were still on when the silence hit, not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes you hear your own breath too loud. The kind that tells you you're not welcome even when the door is technically open. I was standing in my mother's living room, holding a plate I didn't even want, surrounded by decorations I'd helped pay for when I was younger, and still trying to earn a seat at the table. Everyone else was laughing. Not the warm kind of laughter either. The kind that happens when people are comfy, and you're the furniture. My mother didn't look at me once that night. Not when I walked in carrying her favorite cranberry bread. Not when I tried to make a joke about the neighborhood inflatable Santa leaning sideways like he'd given up on life. Not even when I offered to clean up after dinner like I always did just to feel useful. She moved around me like I wasn't there. Like I was wearing a winter coat. And then the moment that really set the hook in my gut happened. My younger brother, golden boy. Charming smile, never had to treat, hard walked in late. Smelling like cologne and entitlement. Mom lit up instantly. Her face had that glow some parents save for one kid. Like it's a family heirloom. She hugged him, asked about his drive, his job, his life, his car. That car, a shiny, oversized SUV that costs more than my yearly grocery bill. The one she'd been talking about all month, as if it were her achievement. I stood there with my cranberry bread and a tight smile, waiting for her eyes to remember I was her child, too. They didn't, so I left early, quietly, like a guest who overstayed. Like someone who should be grateful they were invited at all that next morning. I woke up to an email from my mother. No Merry Christmas. No drive safe. No hope you got home okay. Just a PDF with a title that made my stomach drop. Reimbursement request, vehicle purchase. Attached to it was a $35,000 bill. Her words were short and cold. Your brother needed help. Family helps family. You have a stable income now. Do the right thing. I blinked at it, as if it might change. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because at that point, what else do you do when the universe hands you a plot twist with your name on it? That email wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something nobody in that family saw coming. Let me take you back. Before the bill, before Christmas. Before I learned that love in some homes comes with a price tag. At the end, add welcome story lovers from Where Are You Watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Didn't grow up thinking my mother was cruel. I grew up thinking love was something you earned the way kids earn gold stars in kindergarten. If you behaved, performed, and made her proud. Love showed up like a reward. If you didn't, it vanished like smoke. And I learned early that my brother and I were living in two different emotional climates under the same roof. He was sunshine. I was the weather report. He had potential, she said. He had charisma, she said. He was meant for big things. I was responsible. I was helpful. I was the one who understands. You know what that translates to in family language? He was the dream. I was the glue. My childhood memories are full of minor, unfair math problems. When he forgot his homework, the teacher was too strict. When I got a B, I wasn't trying hard enough. When he crashed his bike, Mom sat beside him all night, feeding him crackers and pity when I sprained my ankle at track practice. She told me to walk it off because we don't have time for drama. None of this was dramatic enough to point to like a scar. It was just steady, subtle shaping like water carving stone, like 1,000 paper cuts. You don't notice until you realize you're bleeding out. Dad left when I was 12, not in a shouting, door slamming way. More in a quiet packing, leaving note. I can't do this anymore kind of way. My brother took it as a personal insult and used it as a reason to rebel. Mom treated him like a wounded prince. She hovered over his grief, excused his anger, protected him from consequences. I took it like what it was, a disaster that needed management. Someone had to keep the house together. Someone had to remember bills, make dinners, pick up my brother after school, and sit through parent-teacher meetings. And Mom was too exhausted to face that someone became me. By high school, I wasn't really a kid anymore. I was an assistant adult. I worked part-time at a grocery store. Not because we were starving, we weren't. but because the lights got shut off twice in 1 year, and I couldn't stand the sound of Mom crying at the kitchen table. I couldn't stand that helplessness settling into the air like dust, so I worked. I bought my own clothes, I paid my own field trip fees, I contributed to groceries whenever I could, without making it obvious. Because the last thing I wanted was for Mom to feel guilty enough to change the rules for my brother. That guilt never traveled in my direction. Anyway, college wasn't a question in my house. It was a fantasy that had to justify its rent. Mom told me I should stay local. She needed help. My brother was going through a phase. She was tired. I was the reliable one. Translation again. Don't leave. You're useful here. But I did leave, sort of. I got a scholarship to a state university 2 hours away. Not far enough to feel free, but far enough to breathe. I studied nursing. Not because it was my deepest childhood dream, but because it was stable. Because I knew hospitals always need people who show up and don't flake. Because stability felt like the closest thing to safety I'd ever met. I also liked the quiet heroism of it. The way you could work in the background of someone else's worst day and still matter. Money was tight. I worked nights at a diner on weekends. Then studied between shifts with coffee that tasted like burnt sadness. My brother visited. Once, he lasted 4 hours before complaining that my dorm was too small and my campus was boring. He left without saying bye, and Mom called later to say I should make more effort because he was sensitive. I wanted to ask when I was allowed to be sensitive, but you don't ask questions in a system that only rewards compliance. After graduation, I moved back home for a year. That was my first big mistake. I told myself I was helping Mom. I told myself I was saving money. I told myself it would be temporary. But old patterns don't wait for your permission. The moment I stepped back into that house, I fell into the role like a coat I'd never outgrown. I paid half the rent. I covered the electric bill until Mom got caught. Up, I bought groceries. I fixed the leaky tap. I drove my brother to job interviews. He didn't show up. 4. Mom said he was still finding himself. In my head, I was thinking, finding himself where? On my gas bill. Still, I didn't complain. Because that's what I was trained to do. Do not rock the boat. Just bail water. Eventually, I got a hospital job in another city. I moved out and something interesting happened when I wasn't around. The boat didn't sink. Mom didn't starve. My brother didn't die of neglect. My absence didn't destroy the family the way everyone acted like it would. What it did do was expose a truth I'd been avoiding. Maybe I wasn't the glue. I was the easiest person to lean on. Life after that was a slow climb. Nursing was hard. Not emotionally hard, that part I was ready for. I'd grown up practicing emotional triage. It was hard in the way long shifts are hard. In the way a pandemic-era hospital is hard. In the way you can be surrounded by people all day and still feel lonely. But I was good at it. I became a charge nurse at 31. Not because I chased titles, but because I showed up, handled chaos, and didn't crumble when things got ugly. I bought a small townhouse. Nothing fancy, but mine. I built routines that felt like peace. Morning coffee on my porch. Sunday laundry with old sitcoms in the background. Little savings goals, little boundaries in that time. My brother drifted through jobs the way some people drift through hobbies. Sales, bartending, crypto consulting, some weird startup that lasted 2 months. Every time life knocked him down, he came back to Mom's couch. And she rocked him like a man-child hurricane. I tried to stay kind. I tried to stay involved. I'd call. I'd visit. I'd bring groceries when I noticed her fridge was thin. I'd slip her cash sometimes under the excuse of I found a good deal. Thought you might like it. She'd thank me quickly, distractedly, like someone accepting water from a faucet. But when my brother asked for money, she'd call me first on to ask for help. But to alert me like a royal announcement was happening. Your brother needs support right now. He's under a lot of pressure. Translation. Make room. The prince has needs. I didn't see it clearly until I got older. When you're young, you think family dynamics are law. You don't question gravity, but with age, you start noticing who always gets held and who always does the holding. I never hated my brother. That's important. I hated the system that made him soft and made me steal. I hated how Mom called my strength independence and his weakness sensitivity. I hated how praise was a limited resource, and somehow he always got the last slice. Still, I kept showing up, because there was always this quiet hope in me. Maybe this time she'll see. This time I'll matter. Love won't require auditioning. Forever. Christmas was the annual test of that. Hope. Some years went. Okay, some years felt like walking into a house where your childhood self still lived in the walls, waiting to be disappointed again. And then came that Christmas, the one where my mother's eyes slid past me like I was a stranger, and my brother's car became the centerpiece of the evening. I didn't know then that the real gift was coming in my inbox the next day. A $35,000 bill. A number so absurd it almost veered into comedy. And yet, as I stared at it, the anger I'd been swallowing for decades finally stood up in my throat like it owned the place. Not rage, not rage. Not screaming, something colder, something clearer. The kind of clarity that comes right before you change your life. At first I thought I was misunderstanding the email. It could be a mistake. Maybe she forwarded something meant for someone else. Maybe my brother had taken her laptop and sent a joke that wasn't funny, so I called her. She picked up on the third ring, voice light and breezy, like she hadn't just asked me to finance a luxury vehicle. I asked what the email meant. She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. She said it was simple. My brother needed a reliable car. She'd put a down payment because she didn't want him driving something unsafe. She expected me to do my part, because I always land on my feet. To her, this was standard logic. To me, it sounded like a hostage note signed by entitlement. I tried to explain that I wasn't rich, that I had a mortgage, that my savings were for emergencies and future plans, not bailing out a grown man who treated effort like an optional subscription. She cut me off. She told me I was being selfish. I was letting money change me, that I had forgotten where I came from. Almost laughed again. Forgotten where I came from. I never got to forget where I came from. It was stamped into my habits, my bank account, my lungs. I was the one who learned to stretch a can of soup into 2 meals. I was the one who learned to work through exhaustion without telling anyone I was tired. I was the one who came from a house where love was conditional and responsibility was female-coded. But I didn't say all that because, even at 34, part of me still wanted to win her approval. Instead, I said no. Calmly, firmly, no. Mom, I'm not paying for that. There was a pause that felt like a door ceiling shut. Then she said fine, and she hung up. For the next 2 weeks, she didn't call, not to apologize, not to talk, not even to guilt trip properly. She just disappeared. Like I'd failed some secret family test. Then came the messages. Not from her, from everyone else. An aunt told me I should help because your brother has had a hard time. A cousin saying family is family. A family friend texting Bible verses about generosity like they were invoices. It was impressive. Honestly, how quickly an entire emotional army forms when a golden child needs something. What was even more impressive, how none of these people ever messaged me when I was the one struggling. No one asked if I was okay during my first year as a nurse when I couldn't sleep after night shifts. No one sent verses when I was splitting rent and groceries to survive college. No. One reminded my brother about responsibility the way they reminded me about sacrifice. The hypocrisy wasn't loud. It was ordinary. And ordinary hypocrisy is the most dangerous kind because it teaches you to tolerate it. But this time, I didn't tolerate. I just watched it, studied it, like a nurse watching symptoms. And under all that noise, I noticed something quietly revolutionary. I was not afraid. I was sad. Sure, hurt, angry, but I wasn't afraid because I was finally seeing this dynamic as a system, not a personal failure. I wasn't the problem. I was the solution they'd been using without asking. That realization did something weird to my spine. It straightened it, so I didn't respond to the messages. I didn't fight. I didn't explain. I just went to work. Lived my life and let the silence stay silent, which is when life did what it loves to do. Brought another twist 3 weeks after the bill. My brother called. Not Mom. He hadn't called me directly in months. He sounded overly cheerful. The way someone sounds when they're about to ask you for a kidney. He said Mom told him I was being difficult. He said he didn't want drama. He said he just needed help getting on his feet. I asked him why he needed a $35,000 car to get on his feet. He got defensive. Said it was an investment. Said he needed to look successful for his new sales role. Said everyone in the industry drives something decent. I asked what industry he was in this week. He didn't answer that part. Instead, he tried to pivot into guilt. How Mom was stressed. How she deserved support. I had more than enough. How it wasn't fair that I got the good job while he was still figuring things out. That line did it. That old family script. Your success proves you owe more. His failure proves he deserves more. I told him no. He called me cold. I told him I'd rather be cold than manipulated. He said I'd regret it. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone after, not shaking. Not crying, just. Stunned at how predictable it was. That's the scariest part of family dysfunction. It runs on repeat like a TV show you never asked to watch. And that's when the real turning point happened. Not in a loud cinematic way, but in a quiet Tuesday morning way. I was driving to work, sipping coffee, when I realized they weren't going to stop. Not because they're evil, because the system works for them. Mom gets to feel like the hero. My brother gets to be the perpetual project. And I get to be the backup generator. Until I decide I'm not. So I started taking action. Not a revenge action, not a petty action, strategic action. First, I pulled my credit reports. I'd heard story siblings opening cards in other siblings' names. Parents mixing finances and honest mistakes. Nothing showed up yet. But the fact that I even had to check broke my heart in a new way. Then I looked through my old bank statements. Years of temporary help. Years of just this once. Years of a slow leak in my financial boat that I'd never called a leak because it was wrapped in the word family. I added it up. Not even obsessively, just enough to face the truth. I had given my mother and brother tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Not at once, not with a formal invoice, but drip by drip. Emergency. Here, holiday, there, rent gap there. 1,000 quiet payments that never came back. And I realized something else. This $35,000 bill wasn't new behavior. It was just the first time they'd said the number out loud in that moment. I felt something that surprised me. Grief, not for the money. For the version of my mother I kept hoping existed. For the family that never learned what love looks like without extraction. I took a day off work, sat at home and asked myself the only question that mattered. If I keep playing my role, what happens to me in 10 years? I pictured it. Still showing up, still paying, still invisible, still the strong one, till I collapsed. And I knew I didn't want that ending. So I did something no one expected. I didn't send an angry email. I didn't post a Facebook rant. I didn't show up at her house to plead. I went quiet, and I went legal. I booked a consultation with a family lawyer. Nothing dramatic, just a calm, professional conversation. He listened while I explained the bill, the history, the pressure. Then he said something that landed like a gavel in my brain. You don't owe her anything. But if she wants to pursue this, we can protect you. And you should document everything. So I did. I saved the PDF. I saved the messages. I wrote down dates, calls, and amounts I remembered giving. Then I took another step. Therapy, not because I was broken, but because I needed a mirror that wasn't fogged with guilt. My therapist asked me to describe my childhood without defending anyone. That was hard. I realized how trained I was to soften the truth. She didn't mean it. He's just struggling. I'm okay. But in that room, I learned to say the truth cleanly. That it hurt. That it was unfair. That I was tired. That I deserved better. Each session felt like laying bricks in a new spine. Meanwhile, Mom's silence turned colder. She removed me from the family group chat. I saw pictures of gatherings I wasn't invited to. My aunt stopped replying to me. It was like they were trying to punish me by taking away what I'd never really had, instead of breaking me. It clarified everything. I wasn't losing love. I was losing access to a system. And then the rising conflict hit its peak. A certified letter arrived, formal, heavy. From my mother, she was actually trying to collect, she claimed. I had verbally agreed to help. She claimed it was a family loan. She gave me 30 days. I read it twice. Then I stared out my window and felt a calmness so deep it scared me. Because that's what happens when people push. You passed your last thread of guilt. You stop negotiating with your own worth. You stop performing for crumbs. You stop trying to prove. You're lovable. I called my lawyer. We drafted a response. Polite, clear, firm, no. I disagreed. No, there is no contract. Do not contact me about this again outside counsel. I mailed it. And just like that, the battlefield was drawn. Not between me and my brother, not even between me and my mother, but between the old version of me and the new one that was waking up. The court date was set for late spring. Yes, she actually filed. Even writing that feels surreal because who sues their own kid over a gift they chose to give someone else? But there we were. Family dysfunction doesn't care how ridiculous it looks in daylight. The morning of court, I wore my navy blazer and a face that felt older than my years. Not because I was scared of losing, but because I was grieving while standing upright in the waiting area. My mother sat with my brother and two aunts behind her like backup singers for a bad song. She didn't look at me, he did. With that same confidence he always had. Like the world was a couch that belonged to him. I sat on the other side with my lawyer. I'd never been in a courtroom before. The walls were beige and boring. Like the building didn't want to be caught holding anyone's drama. When our case was called, we walked in. The judge looked tired and that world weary. Way that says humans have been doing dumb things for centuries and will keep doing them. Mom's lawyer spoke first. He painted a story in which my mother was a sacrificial saint. And I was a cold-hearted success story who had forgotten her roots. He said she'd supported me my whole life. He said I owed her. Said I'd promised to help with the vehicle. It was a theater. And watching my own life turned into a theater was almost funny. Then it was my turn. My lawyer stood. He didn't insult anyone. He didn't do drama. He just laid out facts. The email with the bill. The lack of any written agreement. The pattern of pressure. The reality, a gift is not a debt. Then he asked if I wanted to speak. I didn't have to, but I did. I stood up, hands steady. I didn't look at my mother right away. I looked at the judge and I told the truth in the simplest way possible. I said I loved my family. I said I had helped financially for years. I said I never agreed to buy a car. I said I felt pressured and punished for saying no. I said I was here because boundaries were the only option left. There was a moment after I finished, the kind where you can hear the air conditioner kicking on. My mother finally looked at me. Then, not with sadness, with disbelief. Like I'd just betrayed an ancient law. Like I was a chair that had decided to stand up and walk away. The judge asked my mother whether she had proof that I had agreed. She said I always help. She said she knows what family means. She said she's just bitter. The judge asked again. Proof. She had none. He ruled quickly. Case dismissed. No debt, no reimbursement, no obligation. Just an explicit legal confirmation of what I already knew in my bones. I was not responsible for their choices. My mother went pale. My brother muttered something under his breath. They stood up and walked. past me like I was invisible again. But something had changed. Because this time, invisibility wasn't pain. It was freedom. Outside the courthouse, my lawyer shook my hand and said, I handled myself well. I thanked him. Then I sat in my car and cried, not because I'd won, but because of what it costs to win. The cost wasn't money, it was grief. The grief of finally seeing your parent clearly. The grief of accepting that you can't love someone into loving you correctly. The grief of growing up all over again at 30-4. I drove home slowly. That night, I got a text from my aunt. You didn't have to embarrass your mother like that. I stared at it, then I deleted it because embarrassment wasn't what I'd done. I'd refused to be exploited. And if that looked like embarrassment to them, that said more about their mirror than my face. The next day, my mother sent a short message. Not an apology, a conclusion. Don't contact us for a while. We need space. It was meant as punishment, but it felt like oxygen. The climax wasn't the judge's ruling. It was I who realized I could survive their anger. That I could live without their approval. That love that requires self-erasure isn't love, it's management. And I was done managing. Dear audience, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps the months after the court were weirdly quiet. At first, I kept expecting another shoe to drop, another email, another guilt grenade, another cousin popped out of nowhere to remind me. I was the villain in their story, but the silence held. And in that silence, I started meeting myself again. Not the role, not the helper, not the strong one. Just me. I threw myself into work like I always did. But something inside was softer now, not weaker. Softer. Because I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of someone else's resentment. I started saying no in little places too. No to extra shifts that weren't mine. No to friends who only call when they need a counselor. No to the version of myself that thought rest had to be earned. I traveled for the first time purely for fun. Nothing huge. A week in Arizona, hiking the Red Rocks. Sitting in silence under a sky that looked too big to be owned by anyone else's expectations. One night, ate dinner alone at a small place with string lights out front. A couple at the following table laughed loudly. Someone behind the bar was playing old country music. And I realized I wasn't lonely. I was peaceful. That was new, back home. I joined a local mentorship program for young women in healthcare. It started casually. A hospital flyer. A couple of weekly sessions. But it grew into something that made my chest warm in a way family never did. These girls were smart, hungry, scared. They reminded me of my younger self. Only difference. They were being told they deserved to dream. I taught them budgeting tips, career advice, and survival strategies for tough shifts. But I also taught them something I'd had to learn the hard way. Being strong doesn't mean being available to everyone. You can be compassionate without being consumed. And as I taught them, I healed. That's the funny thing about boundaries. At first, they feel like walls. Then you realize they're doors. You get to decide who enters. Meanwhile, life at my mother's house continued in predictable patterns. I heard it secondhand. My brother missed payments. The SUV got repossessed. Mom scrambled to cover it. Then she blamed the economy, the industry, the timing, anything but the truth. He was old enough to carry his own weight. She was addicted to carrying it for him. 6 months after the court, got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Mom. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She said she wasn't calling to fight. She said she missed me. She said she didn't understand why things got so far. There was a long pause in her message, like she expected me to sprint back into my role. I didn't call her right away. That might sound cold, but sometimes the kindest thing you can do is not open a door. Before you know what's on the other side, I talked to my therapist. We planned what a safe conversation would look like. Then I called. We met for coffee in a neutral place. I didn't rush to hug her. She looked older, tired, not in a way that made me want to rescue her. In a way that made me see she was a human who made choices. She said she felt betrayed. Said she was embarrassed. She said she only wanted what was best for the family. I listened. Then I asked her a simple question. When was what was best for me ever the priority? She blinked, like no one had ever asked that. She didn't have an answer. She tried to shift into old logic. You were always fine. You never needed help. I said quietly that being fine shouldn't have disqualified me from care. She got defensive, then sad, then quiet. We didn't solve everything in one coffee. This isn't a fairy tale, but something changed. Not overnight, but enough. She started calling once a week, not to ask for money, just to talk. Sometimes she'd slip into old patterns, hinting about my brother, testing my boundaries, but I held steady. I said I was open to a relationship, not to financial dependency, not to guilt narratives, slowly. She adjusted, my brother didn't. He stayed distant. He'd send occasional sarcastic texts. He never apologized. I stopped expecting one. And that was its own kind of freedom. The biggest redemption wasn't the court. It wasn't watching his SUV disappear. It wasn't hearing Mom's voice soften. It was this. One day, I woke up and realized I no longer felt responsible for their happiness. I loved them, but I didn't carry them. That's the line between love and sacrifice. The funny twist. When I stopped rescuing, my life expanded. Not because money magically grew on trees, but because emotional energy is a currency too, and I finally invested it in myself. I renovated my tiny backyard, planted herbs and tomatoes, got a rescue dog named Juniper who thinks she's a wolf. The house felt like a home, not a waiting room at work. I applied for a supervisory position in community health outreach. I was scared, not because I wasn't qualified, but because I was used to being the background person. I got it. The job involved working with underserved families, teaching health literacy, and helping people navigate medical systems. It felt like coming full circle, like taking everything I'd survived and turning it into something useful. Mom came to my little promotion celebration. She brought a cake. She sat in my living room, looking around like she'd never realized I built a life worth being proud of. She said she was proud of me, not in passing, not in comparison, just proud, and believed her enough to let it land. Sometimes life doesn't hand you a villain. Sometimes it hands you a family. And the hardest lesson isn't learning how to fight strangers. It's learning how to stop bleeding for people who call it love. My mother ignored me at Christmas. Then she sent me a $35,000 bill for my brother's car. And in the moment, it felt like betrayal. But looking back, it was a gift. Not because the bill was kind, because it was clear. It drew a bright line. Under everything I'd been living in gray for decades, it forced me to see the pattern. I was only valued for what I gave. My brother was valued for who he was perceived to be. And my mother was trapped in her own version of love, where rescuing one child meant quietly draining the other. I used to think redemption meant winning their approval, but redemption actually meant reclaiming myself. I didn't become rich. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't even stop loving my family. I just stopped letting love be a one-way road. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. The moment I said no, I became the example. Not just for my mother, for every younger nurse I mentored. For friends who watched me walk through the court with my head up. For the version of me that used to think strength meant silence. People started telling me my story helped them set boundaries. Helped them say no without apology. Helped them see that being the reliable one doesn't mean being the exploitable one. And my mother, she's still learning. Some days she slips. Some days she shows up beautifully. Healing isn't a straight line, but now the relationship is a choice, not a sentence.